Willow, let's start with you. Where's Jerry McNeely, the Independent Police Review Director of Ontario, at now with his review of the Thunder Bay Police Service?
Yeah, so we've heard from Jerry McNeely recently. We know that he began the review last fall, and since then he's he's come to Thunder Bay more than a dozen times, and he's met with First Nations leaders, individuals, the police, policing organizations, and different community groups, service groups, as he reviews the Thunder Bay Police. His review has also included, as we've heard and reported, 39 death investigations from the Thunder Bay Police. He initially, our last report that we heard earlier, he was planning to have it completed by this fall. That's now been pushed back to the new year. He hopes to have it complete by the new year, the end of the winter area, and he is planning to hold a public meeting here in Thunder Bay on September the 25th, and that will give an opportunity for people of Thunder Bay to voice their concerns, share their concerns, suggestions, and perspectives on the relationship between the City Police and Indigenous people here.
Kenneth, when you were in Thunder Bay on the ground, were you hearing from people that there is a need for a systemic review of the way police treat Indigenous deaths and missing person investigations?
Absolutely. They also talk about getting rid of Thunder Bay Police. A lot of people on the street told me that. Other people have told me that. But really, to talk about this death review is really to look at Tammy Kiash's death. You know, I went and met with Pearl Kiash, her mother, at the hospital because she was hospitalized at the time. And I had my first conversation with her, and I said to her, separate the fact whether your daughter was murdered or she died by suicide. The big question is whether police handled the investigation properly. And because there's a history of it, of them not, and are being suspected of not doing so. And I said to her, tell me what happened. And she started taking me through how she didn't trust police, they weren't telling her everything. And she said, there was a bite mark on her hand, there was a mark on her face, that sort of thing. So I did a story on the mother questioning what happened. Then we held the press conference, and as you saw earlier, and I put questions to Don Lewis there, and I said, how can you be so quick to rule that it's not suspicious when it was just days? And he goes, based on the evidence that we have, it doesn't lead to that conclusion that it was foul play. Well, Willow and I, shortly after that, found an eyewitness that no one knew about, and it was a church pastor, like a youth pastor, who found the body. Actually, kids found the body because they were running around in the park. They found Tammy Kiash's body. And so we talked to the youth pastor, and we did a story on that, and it was a pretty earth-shattering story because it implied that there was other questions there, like what Tammy Kiash's mother, Pearl, said. She wasn't being told everything. Well, she definitely wasn't told that her daughter was found partially nude from the waist down, and that certain clothing, and that there was a lot of questions there. And she's also told me, Pearl said, cops told her that her daughter was found 3 feet into the floodway, which is full of reeds and that sort of thing, very little water. Well, the eyewitness said he found her 15 feet out, and Pearl wasn't just like, well, I think he said this. She was adamant, 3 feet in. So there's a lot of questions what police were saying to her and what they were holding back, and whether or not there was more evidence. Well, I think most think that if a girl is found partially nude waist down in the middle of a floodway full of reeds, that leads people to may think maybe you should pump the brakes. Maybe you should think about taking an extra day or two or a few weeks or a couple months for determining whether there's no foul play. I think that's just logical. And so, shortly thereafter, you talk about systemic review. Well, on Thunder Bay Police right now, are working with York Police because Chief Coroner of Ontario brought them in to work on Tammy Kiash's case and Josiah Bagg. And I think that our work had a lot to do with that, and to bring an outside police force in to look at that. And Pearl Kiash has told me she's been speaking with detectives, and I've asked her, are they any closer to determining whether or not it was foul play? And she goes, we're not there yet. But they're keeping her updated, whereas before, I was the one telling her everything. I was the one that told her about her being partially nude. I'm the one that told her about York Regional Police coming in. That shouldn't happen. I've been a crime reporter for about 10, 12 years. Not too many times have I been the first person to a family member, particularly after a death. That should have been on the police, on the detective, but it wasn't for whatever reason. So I think that goes to why people don't trust the police there, and they have questions on why they think, I'm not sure there'll only be a systemic review, but they question whether or not Thunder Police should be a service at all.
Willow, the police watchdog tells APTN that 39 deaths dating back to the 1990s are being looked into. Often the city ends up being the murder capital of Canada like it was in 2016. And you've been looking into some of the numbers from this year so far.
Right. So we know that the 39 investigations that that the director is looking into that they're not all Indigenous people, but he's looking at non-Indigenous also just to compare how the investigations are conducted. We also know that 7 of those are going to be from the student inquest, and those deaths occurred between 2000 and 2011. Now, more recently, since January of this year, there have been at least 10 First Nations people who have died, I guess, unexpectedly in the city. 4 of those have resulted in homicide charges, and the rest of those are just unsolved at this point. So there's a lot of family members in the city and around the city who have lost loved ones this year, and they're searching for answers. They don't know how they died. And they just want answers, and that's kind of been the climate of the concerns surrounding all of these deaths over the years in Thunder Bay.
Willow, as somebody who lives in the city and has for their entire life, what is the relationship between the Indigenous community and Thunder Bay Police in light of all that's gone on here in recent times?
Clearly, it's a troubled relationship, one that lacks trust, basically, you know, I recall one of my conversations with Chief Levesque last year, this of course before his charges, but when he was still in his role as Chief of Police, you know, he expressed and acknowledged that there is a historic mistrust between First Nations people and the police, you know, and that goes back to, of course, you know, residential school days and even before that. But I think it's also important to understand and be aware of how the historic relationship carries forward today and how that is impacting the people of Thunder Bay now. So we've seen, you know, evidence of, you know, there's just First Nations people not feeling safe or comfortable going to the police with any concerns or reporting things. And then, of course, you know, we have reports of police officers themselves in Thunder Bay, you know, posting racist comments online, and that really contributes to the extremely strained relationship between the police and First Nations people here in the city.
Kenneth, as you mentioned, you know, you've been reporting on crime for many years now. You looked in depth into this issue. What are some of the questions that linger in your mind here?
Well, you know, when I first decided that I wanted to go to Thunder Bay, you know, I was asked, well, what do you have planned? And I said, nothing. I'm going to hit the streets and I'm going to talk to people. Sure enough, I was sent up there for that reason alone. And I figured that, you know, I've never been there. I figured I'd find out what was going on by talking to people who walk on the streets there, walk the sidewalk, who are from there. And sure enough, my first interview, I go up and I interview a young couple on the river, McIntyre. And they're having a couple of drinks out of a bottle, like spiced rum or whatever. They're, you know, they're friendly. They're having a conversation. Police show up. Really, there was no reason for the police to show up. I'm there with my cell phone, and I'm holding it up, and I'm recording them talking to me. I just wanted to get a feel for the city, get started. Boom, the cops show up, and they kind of ask a lot of questions, name dates, where you're from, birth dates, things they didn't have to answer, but they did. You know, the thing that, and so they kind of leaded them. They left and then came back and took the kids away to a shelter. Lo and behold, 2 days later, I'm down by where one of the young, I think, Anderson, young boy named Anderson, was found in the river. And on an old Via Rail train car, there someone wrote, "I killed those kids." I thought it was interesting, so I took a picture and I tweeted it. You know, it's Twitter. What, you know, big deal, right? Well, got a call from Thunder Bay Police the next day wanting me to come into the station and give a recorded interview. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. So it didn't happen, but they did end up charging some kid with that. The same person I was speaking to. That kid's got pretty severe, not severe, but he's got brain damage. He had an accident when he was younger. He suffers from alcoholism. But the interesting thing, too, about that is the young girl and the young boy, and they're like in their 20s, who they're connected to. The young man is connected to Barbara Kentner. He dated her. As you know, Barbara Kentner died recently. She had a trailer hitch thrown at her by a passing vehicle. They're still waiting to determine whether or not that's going to be upgraded to a murder charge. He also was friends with Stacey Debungy. Stacey Debungy died the year prior, or in 2015, I believe it was. He was found in the river. Again, police said no foul play, even though there was a fight before there. His debit card was used by somebody else. The young girl, she's connected to her brother was recently murdered. It's an unsolved murder case, I believe. Braden Munaz, and her dad also drowned in the river right there. So what I found is that people, these are two random people, but look how widely connected they are to all of the pretty massive stories out there. And not to mention, why is it the first person I spoke to gets charged with that crime? The reality is that, there's a lot of questions in that, but it's just, Thunder Bay to me as a crime reporter, I don't want to call it a playground because it's people's lives and they never should be treated that way. But there's an endless amounts of stories, and there's endless amounts of people who are dying in mysterious ways, and the big question mark is whether police are handling it properly.
Yeah, you bring up two cases there, Kenneth, that we didn't even get to touch on here with Barbara Kentner and Stacey Debungy. His death is what's led to this investigation. Willow, can you tell us what you think is going to be taking place in Thunder Bay over the next year or so here? What do you see taking place?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, with all of this happening over the year is a lot of backlash from the city and other groups and city residents about the negative spotlight, I guess, from national media. But I think what's important to remember here is that this isn't about negative stories or hating the city of Thunder Bay, because the First Nations demographic here is large and it's growing, and that's mostly because First Nations families are choosing to relocate to Thunder Bay, and they want to make Thunder Bay their home. They love the city. They enjoy what the city has to offer. They want to raise their children here. What they don't love is the racism and the violence that they encounter once they get here. And it's killing people, really. So, what we're going to continue to see, I think, are people's concerns and issues being raised over safety until there is a collective effort from everybody to acknowledge and work what's clearly broken here. So there's a lot of big hopes and expectations also from not just the review from the police director, but also the review that's going to be led by Senator Murray Sinclair in the coming year as well. So it's going to be interesting to see those results and how the police and city choose to respond to that.